Hey everyone, how's it going this morning? Welcome to the Ultimate Guide to Cyber Defense webinar presented by us here at Axcient and our friends at Chartec. Just give us 2 to 3 more minutes and we'll go ahead and get started. We're just waiting for a couple more people to join the webinar. Thanks for your patience.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Ultimate Guide to Cyber Defense presented by Axcient and Chartec. This is Michael Elliott, Product Marketing Director for Axcient, and joining with me today is Eric Timmons. Eric, introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, my name is Eric Timmons. Great intro there, Michael. I'm the Senior Sales Manager at Axcient. I've been with the company for close to 5 years in different roles and capacities, but I've been working specifically with MSPs for close to 5 years. So that's a little bit about myself. I know a couple things about data protection, specifically kind of backup disaster recovery and last line of defense and all that good stuff. So excited to share some tips and tricks today.
Yep, absolutely. And I know just from your history of being here, you've seen security change and evolve, and the threat vectors amplify over your 5 years, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But let's go ahead and get started with a poll. So if everybody can just let us know, what do you believe, what percentage of SMBs are permanently closed following a cyber attack? And of course, I know the answer to this, but Eric, what's your thoughts on how many are permanently going to close?
Well, I feel like we have to say over 50%, right? Just to scare people a little bit more.
No, and it is amazing the numbers around the percentage how the impact. We think about it in you get hit with ransomware, you've got to pay Bitcoin, but the true impact is even if you get your data back, it's so incredible the amount that actually closed. And the answer that most people thought is over 50%, and that is correct. So from an SMB perspective, you get hit with a cyber attack. We've got a lot of examples just here in Denver, Colorado, where we're headquartered, of companies just close up shop and call it a day. It's that impactful to their business. All right, so let's go back to the slide deck, and let's go ahead and start talking about the state of the industry. There we go. All right, so just talking a little bit around ransomware on the rise. And these reports, the numbers I'm going to cite to you, come from a McAfee report. But ransomware actually increased between 2018 into 2019, we saw an increase of 118% increase in ransomware. And they report, they being McAfee, that there are essentially 504 threats per minute. 504 threats per minute. And any guess, Eric, of what is the worst offender, or where they incur the most from a perspective of how do they get in?
How they get in? I mean, it's by not having the proper layers of defense and security measures in place, right? And I think it goes back to, in terms of the ransom, who these people are targeting. It's, you think of stories like Target from a few years ago and some of these bigger name companies. In all reality, SMB is more of a focus just because they know, they don't have the infrastructure or the resources, or to the poll question before, they could potentially go out of business if they don't pay this, right? So they know there's a little bit more vulnerability there.
No, agreed. And what McAfee found that in 77% of the time, it is human interaction. It is that phishing. It is that, going in and asking for information via the phone or via an email that gets them into the account to begin with. So no matter how deep your layered security is, sometimes it's the people that your worst enemy. So just some example of some recent data breaches. I wasn't even aware when we started doing this research on Pitney Bowes. Pitney Bowes just got hit in October 14th is when they started announcing that Pitney Bowes. And Pitney Bowes is, if you have a mail service in your company where you're measuring, or you're measuring the weight of the envelopes and the packages and automatically putting stamps on it, that is the Pitney Bowes equipment. And they were shut down for a few days because they got hit with a malware attack that shut down everybody's ability essentially to reload their machines and be able to send out mail. So sending out invoices, sending out bills. Companies weren't able to do that. Companies that rely on that to make money from a mail perspective shut down. DoorDash was another one that came up, and DoorDash, most people should be somewhat familiar with DoorDash. DoorDash got hit with an incursion where they got exposed all of their client information, names, addresses, credit card numbers, and that information went immediately to the dark web for the hackers selling that information to other parties who then use that to create credit cards, to then go out and spend other people's money just based on that. And then the third one, City of Baltimore. I think everybody's kind of heard about City of Baltimore. And what was amazing from the City of Baltimore's account was their lack of backing up and having true security defense in place. We're talking about a city, and their expense is looking into like the $20 million range to be able to recover and then try to put out preventative measures going forward. And we'll talk a little bit about those preventative measures, but that was just really kind of amazing that they didn't want to spend the money and they got hit, and the cost to them of what that's going to be like. So when we look at, every hack that we're seeing, there's really 10 that we're not seeing. So you're very potentially getting hacked right now and not knowing it, or you've been infected with some type of malware. And there's a dwell time ticking. So what we call in the industry the dwell time is the point where the infection occurred before they actually activate it. And that can be anywhere from a day to a weekend to a month before the hackers actually go in and then start doing the damage. So during that time, they're collecting your information, whether it's a keystrokes and they're looking at all your passwords, whether they're just romping around in there, waiting till the best time to actually start deleting your files and encrypting your data, and then talking to you about the amount of Bitcoin it's going to cost for you to recover. So remember that if you don't think you're getting attacked, quite possibly you are, and you need to start thinking about the measures to put in place. Now, from an Axcient perspective, we think a lot around security and our MSPs and their protection. And we're really looking to solve, three problems at the highest level. One of which is the idea around security-ware. So there are things that we're putting in place from the perspective of MFA, multi-factor authentication, the ability to roll back from a ransomware and reset the clock to before that dwell time, as well as some other things that we're working on that we'll be announcing soon about even if your business continuity, disaster recovery actually gets hit, your cloud gets hit, the ability to recover from that even though everything's been deleted or encrypted. Secondly, we're seeing a lot of people moving towards the cloud, especially around Office 365, but in general from an application layer, moving those applications from on-site servers to cloud-based servers. And the ability to back up and recover that information is another one of those high-level things, problems, or solutions that we're trying to make sure that we protect our MSPs that come onto our service. And third then is around complexity. We and other vendors have done a horrendously bad job of making things too complex in the marketplace. We need to solve that to make it simpler for you to utilize us to manage both your application layer, your file and folder layer, as well as your Office 365 layer, and do that from a single console. So we rolled out 2 weeks ago the X360 Experience. It is a single unified portal for you to have the ability to manage all of our solutions with a new look, new user interface, new GUI, single sign-on capability, access to both onboarding, marketing, and sales enablement, billing and invoicing information, all through one experience. And we're not done yet. This is just the beginning of the experience because we recognize that the simpler it is to work with us, the simpler it is to operationally manage your clients, as well as the simpler it is to manage the security level of that component for business continuity and disaster recovery.
Gave me a chill.
Oh, thank you. So I'm going to come back to this, but when you're starting to think about security, one way to look at it is really around a layered security approach. And on this slide, there is a lot of things, and this isn't all of it, but there are a lot of things you need to be thinking about from a security perspective. In any one of these points, whether it's endpoint or the firewall or email or your security training, any one of these fail, excuse me, that is access for the bad actors of the world to get into you and get into your client's data. I mean, MSPs now are the target. They're not targeting clients. They're targeting MSPs. They're targeting you. So it's imperative for you to start thinking about, well, how do I prevent this? And we're going to kind of go through a three-step process here. And step one is really focused on, first, you got to prepare yourselves and your clients knowing that you're going to be attacked. And when you start to think about being prepared, understand your security environment. And it can begin with a number of different points. I'll pull out a couple of them. The first is around a dark web scan. And, a couple of years ago, we didn't even know what the dark web was. Well, we did, but the common person didn't really know what the dark web is. But there are a lot of tools out there now to be able to scan the dark web to look for both, your client's information, your corporate information, your passwords and administrative information, to go out and look, does that exist out there? And if it does exist, that's the time to be afraid. Second point around this is cybersecurity training. You need to be training both yourselves and your employees as well as your clients around cybersecurity and what they need to think about from that perspective. Third point around this is, governance. What are you going to do if you get impacted? You should be setting up what are those procedures that you're going to enact, not if, but when you get hit, because it is a case of when. And it can be, how are you going to fall back? How are you going to be able to move the clock back to before the incursion and begin the process there and then start recovering from that point forward? Another point, and this is something, Eric, that we do a lot around here, and I've got a story around this, but around simulated phishing emails. You should be sending simulated emails to your clients to see if they will click on that link. And the link, it's a non-intrusive link, but it's a test to see exactly, will your clients fall for a phishing scam? Because like I talked about earlier, the people are the worst person from allowing incursion. So I'd like to hear your kind of thoughts, Eric, on a simulated phishing email and kind of what that's done and how that has enabled companies to understand their vulnerabilities.
I think it's great. I think you'll be actually surprised at the results, and which is good and bad. It's bad in the regards of you may actually find out that there's more user error than you'd like to think there is, and then good in the sense that, okay, we've got some work to do. Here's what we can do to fix things and go over tips and tricks and best practices. Funny over here, you actually, not you, but someone pretending to be you sent something to me, and I fell for it. I thought it was odd at first because it was using I think like a Dropbox account, which I was gonna grill you about using a competitor of ours. So I opened it up to see what was in there, and of course I get an alert saying you fell for it, blah, blah, blah. And it turns out I wasn't the only one, which made me feel a little bit better. But yeah, there's things like that where you just have to, keep testing yourself and keep practicing, because someone like myself, who I preach data protection and having security best practices every single day to our MSPs, and yet I fell for something like that. So it's just one of those things where practice makes perfect, and doing these simulations and different things like that gives you a pulse on each individual client as well. I mean, you may think, one client's had the curve where you can say, hey, 85% of people failed this test, but we need to get in there and do some training, or, put some additional layers of security in place to where this doesn't happen in the first place.
Yeah, and for a company like Axcient, that security is so important to us because of how many clients, how many partners we have to ensure we protect. You think about going into if your client is a manufacturer or a doctor's office, they're not thinking about these things. So these simulated phishing emails and employee vulnerability assessment tests really get to the heart of just how bad your clients are going to be. And it provides you with a leg up and more of a strategic focus on the protection you're providing and showing their vulnerability around that.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, second step around this then is around prevention and developing that layered security approach. And when, before I had the slide that kind of focused around this big circle, but really a layered security approach is more like an onion and trying to put layer upon layer upon layer of protection in place. And one of those is a defense in depth, or DID strategy, and a DID strategy is really an approach to cybersecurity in which there's a series of defensive mechanisms in kind of that layered onion-like approach. Another way of looking at prevention is more of a proactive sentinel plan. And in this, you're really just starting to proactively and continuously monitor for threats. You're going out there and looking at, am I getting hit on certain ports? Do I see some unusual activity around specific ports, which could indicate that information is getting siphoned off through a layer that I wasn't aware that existed? Third and fourth kind of prevention is around that coaching and coaching your clients on best security practices, but also making sure that you've assigned somebody that truly knows and understands security and security threats and are aware of the threat vectors and is keeping abreast of those. I was talking to one MSP over the summer that he ultimately had to pay in Bitcoin. He said, he owns the company. He said, it was my fault. I had one of my IT folks, I gave him the responsibility of protecting my business. And that was my fault because he was not equipped to do that. That was not what he was hired to do. That was not what he was trained to do. But I kind of gave it to him and I didn't think twice about it. And that was my Achilles heel. third then point then is around prevailing. And Eric, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about how do you prevail after an attack.
I think, this goes into something I'll talk about in a little bit, but it goes to having, that plan in place, right? And the repeated practice makes perfect. I'm going to say that a lot because it's, what's the, earthquake drill? What's the fire drill? What's the, you have to think about, as far and few between as they may sound in terms of natural disasters. What's the plan for that? And then what's the plan for, actual like cybersecurity, hack of and sorts of that, and just what that looks like, right? And it's documenting it, but also practicing it, making sure it plays out.
No, agreed. And within every company though, and when I talk about, what do you do and what do you set up as far as knowing that eventually you're going to get hit? And part of that, in there is that breach PR coaching is how do you admit when you get hit and what you say after you get hit and what you say to your clients about the impact and how you're going to recover is extremely important that you have that figured out before you get hit, because during an incident, during that time, you're not going to be thinking straight as far as that goes.
Right.
You need to have a plan in place of how do I react? How do I get business back to before the impact so that as a company and as an MSP, I'm going to continue to exist because I'm rolling back the clock and eliminating that threat and not figuring out how to pay Bitcoin.
And I think, being in sales, I naturally gravitate towards that aspect. And we don't have a slide about this, but I think from MSPs, there's not a lot of barriers to entry to become a managed service provider. So I think a lot of it's around what's your differentiated value, how do you go to market, what makes you different than the other, dozen managed service providers in your area. And I think having kind of a documented business continuity plan from the beginning of, when this hits steps, kind of 1 through 8, 10, whatever that looks like, and then obviously DR kind of being your last line of defense is important. And I think, to your point, Michael, you talk about, it's not really a matter of, it's going to happen, right? If but when type of thing. And especially with all the data out there, especially with ransomware, I feel like you hear a story in the news where, us in the industry, we hear about that because we're looking for that all the time now. But from an end user perspective, everybody sees, all these attacks, what the risks are, having your data, being held ransom. And so having a differentiated value of, hey, this is how we protect it, different use cases, studies, and, almost like selling insurance in a way where it's, you need this now because when it does hit the fan, you're going to need something to recover your data and get your business up and running again.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point. It is a comprehensive insurance plan. It's not only how do I recover, but where am I going to stay? Where's the data going to reside? How am I going to get this back?
Yeah.
And the better your incident response team and the better that plan, the quicker you can recover and ensure your clients are staying in business.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's to the poll question earlier. That was the whole point of how many people can go out of business because of this. So using this as a differentiated value is critical.
And there's examples of a number of MSPs that once they got hit, they've closed the doors and left their clients high and dry.
Gotcha.
Don't be that MSP. So that we're going to go to another poll question, and that is, are you providing your clients phishing campaigns, dark web scanning, and governance documents? So I'm going to be real interested to see how many of the folks on here, at least what percentage.
Be truthful.
Yeah, be truthful. How many of them are actually doing this? And when I go out and present and talk, to some degree, most are thinking about that, but they haven't actually done all of this. And I've talked to MSSPs, as managed services and security providers, and not all of them are doing this. So if you can be honest and just answer this, we don't know who answered yes or who answered no. So we're not going to hold you against it, but it'd be really interesting to see how many people are really providing all of this. And the answer is 69%. So 69% are truthful and saying no, but congratulations to the 31% that are saying yes. That is encouraging. I think if we would have asked this poll just 6 months ago, it probably
Sure.
would have been in the teens as far as how many are actually doing it.
Yeah, I think it goes also to time, right? A lot of managed service providers I speak to is just wearing multiple hats, doing different jobs, and so it's easy to understand the value and importance of this, but it's a totally separate thing to actually allocate time and make sure you're providing the attention and resources to doing scans and campaigns like this. So with that being said, I'll take over here on some, kind of tips and tricks. And this slide is really about, I think, internal and external education. From a security standpoint, as a managed service provider, you're, essentially hired on to be that IT trusted advisor for your clients. But, a lot of your end clients aren't going to really understand the best tips and tricks they should use and what, and once we boil it down to how much phishing attacks and different, ransomware attacks happen because of just human error, what they could be doing to prevent it. And I think it really goes on to everybody to educate, right? And so there's different ways of doing that. Me being in sales, I've got the attention span of a goldfish. So I think from in terms of constant communication, it's 15-minute chunks of training, right? How can we just do like a quick stand-up, Tuesday morning, hey, here's the best practice of the week. Instead of, how many times have we all been in, an HR 2 hour, a half day, full day seminar or something where after about 20 minutes, you're like, okay, what box do I check? What do I sign to say I did this training? And then when you think about it, they're important, but the way you come across and communicate it will actually hold the retention of the information. And so I think implement it, gamify it. I think that's a big one. Any kind of like spiffs, incentives you can do. If we do some type of test around the training or role play, how can you get people more engaged? I think anybody that's done corporate training will tell you is you've got all these. You try to make it fun for everybody, but at the end of the day, security is not exactly a fun topic that everybody is, especially from an end client perspective, very into. So how do you make that easy and give them digestible content that's applicable to their everyday life?
Yeah, we've kind of reverse gamified this at Axcient, whereas if you leave your computer unlocked and you walk away from any point in time, anybody's welcome to come up to your computer and Slack to the general Axcient community that you left it open. And if that happens, you get to wear the fish hat. So we have a fish hat that people have to wear if they leave their computer undocked. And part of that is kind of fun, but part of it is it's a compliance requirement, HIPAA and SOX compliance, that we have to make sure that the people on the floor have checked in, have been passed from a security perspective, and it ensures that from us as a company, we're making sure that we are following the rules and we're doing the proper security procedures from ourselves. So it's kind of we don't make it nasty, but it kind of keeps drawing attention to security.
Yeah, bullet point we didn't throw up on the slide is public shaming, right? Nothing nothing will quite get you to change your habits than throwing stones, right? But going on to the next slide, I think we could talk about holistically what your disaster recovery plan looks like. And it goes to what I was talking about a little bit earlier of first really just kind of maybe whiteboarding it, writing out what that plan of attack is and documenting it, and there's a lot of different things you can document, and it really kind of boils down to, identify what the risks are, prioritize what the business needs are. If something goes down, what's the first thing you need to get back up? Is it, making sure accounting and payroll is up and running because checks and invoices have to go out? Is it, relocating the office? I mean, it really, like I said at the beginning of the webinar, it really depends on what that disaster is. And so we kind of use disaster recovery loosely, but it's, whether you're in a hurricane area, we've had partners in Joplin, Missouri, where a tornado comes through and different things like that. So being prepared for that, but as well as just what happens if there's a ransomware attack and you literally can't log in your computer, all your files are locked out, etc. So there's a lot of different things to going into that kind of pre-planned business continuity package. But inherently at the very end, one of the last steps has to be including a built-in backup. So you can't really have a disaster recovery plan without that last line of defense for protecting your data. And that's where Obviously, I want to plug Axcient, but that's really where a DR strategy and scenario comes into play. And maybe reverse this. You talk about practice makes perfect. Start at the beginning with, I think of in school when we did earthquake tests. I grew up in California, right?
Yeah.
So getting under your desk and single file outline. I mean, literally, it may sound dumb, but just practicing what the actual scenario looks like, and then practicing it from a data recovery standpoint. So whether you're using us or another vendor for BDR or BCDR, see what it's like to actually recover data. If it's a local copy or in the cloud, how quickly does it take to spin up? Are those RTOs meeting the needs of your clients? And if they're not, take a step back and figure out, big picture here, if this is the right strategy. And you only find that out by testing it and practicing.
And that really enables you from being a tactical MSP to more of a strategic MSP. When you are turning this up and showing how you can recover, whether it's on a semi-annually or quarterly basis, but proving that you have the ability to, in case of a disaster, no matter what it is, you have the ability to keep your clients operational, that is going to elevate how your clients see you as a strategic partner for them.
Absolutely. And then to quote our CEO, the way to think about business continuity, backup recovery is essentially being that last line of defense. And so you mentioned the different layers of security you have. You could plan all you want, but we gotta keep this PG for the webinar. But when it hits the fan, what are you going to do to get your client's data back? And there's different things from keeping hackers out and ransomware attacks out from the first place. But guess what? Odds are, even the companies with the best layers of security in place, those viruses, they still get in, right? So when that does happen, what is that last line of defense to recover your data? And so that's really what it boils down to is, we kind of mentioned the not if, but when, and, when that does happen, what's that, step 8, step 10, whatever that is that you're going to do to get your clients back. And so with that being said, I can segue better myself to give ourselves a little plug here. But Axcient, we protect everything. And that goes to, the different layers of, is it just file and folder? Is it, getting your on-prem devices into the cloud? Is it backing up your Office 365 data, which, Microsoft isn't liable for? They have a limited retention window on that already. Or is it full-blown disaster recovery as a service and, having that BDR plan in place? So we really step up when it comes to getting your data back. And I think as a differentiator, you have to think about, I'm not used to the BCDR terminology. I still use BDR. And so I think backup, disaster recovery, and I think, the first letter B for backup, that should be inherent.
Yeah.
As long as if you go to a vendor for backup, then if they don't back it up, then obviously they shouldn't be in business, right? I think what's a differentiator and what's really gonna protect you is the recovery piece of having those RTOs. So being able to spin up, a local appliance to get your data back on site. Now, God forbid a scenario happens where, the local site goes down, you have to recover a copy from the cloud, we can help you there as well. And so whether you need, whatever option kind of fits you best, Axcient protects you. And being a part of this business and seeing, especially how ransomware has evolved over the years. And I have a podcast where we interviewed a professor at UConn, and he was, talking about, people sell ransomware as a service now. You can buy software.
Oh, absolutely.
So for me, who knows, not the most technically advanced person, I could buy the software and just start attacking people left and right.
Yep.
So that's how advanced it's getting. So in conclusion, just having that DR plan in place, especially knowing what that last layer of security is, because once you get through all the steps and you get to the end, you got to get your client's data back. Otherwise, you'll be a part of that over 50% number that we talked about at the beginning of the webinar.
No, agreed. So I know we're going to go on to questions. I know we have one question. Hopefully through all this, we've scared you enough to act. I know
morbid ending right there. I could have done a better job. Yeah.
and I know a lot of you are thinking about this. The issue is there's just too much to know. There's too much to do. So being both proactive, but also understanding how you need to react when it does happen is important, and it's critical. And like I talked about earlier, you are the target. You as an MSP, I mean, we're a target, obviously. There's a lot we can do, but we have a whole security team structure in place to constantly monitor what's going on, because we get intrusions, or at least attempted intrusions on a daily basis. I mean, you can say hourly basis, but we have actively monitoring this and understanding what's going on, and have a lot of in-depth knowledge and skill to, be able to keep our company and our clients safe. There was one question that came in from Robert. He says, does Axcient have sample phishing email campaigns? What I can do is I can get a link from the CISO of the ones that we use and how he did that, and send that out to you, Robert. So we'll do that at the conclusion of this webinar. We'll get you the link to the one that we use so that you can incorporate that into yours. Is there any other questions?
Yes,
All right.
Yes, there is.
All right, there's one more question.
In regards to business continuity and disaster recovery services offered by Axcient, what would be the differentiating factors that set Axcient apart?
Do you mind if I take that one,
Go
Michael?
for
I think it's kind of what I talked about towards the end there, where us versus vendor B, vendor C, whatever, we all back up. We get that. What separates us is the recovery piece and the flexibility piece. So a lot of vendors, it's kind of their way of the highway. You have to buy their hardware, use their cloud, all these different steps. From a flexibility component, for backup disaster recovery, an appliance is required on site. So you back up your local machines, servers, workstations to that appliance. From that appliance, it goes to the cloud. Your first line of defense is to really recover from that local appliance. The last line is to recover from the cloud. So we give you that flexibility of you can kind of build your own hardware out. So if you're more, if you think you've got, a local vendor that you can get hardware from, and you can build this out cheaper than what we can provide from an appliance standpoint, by all means do that. If you have your own data center or a co-location on a data center, you could use our software with that as well. So we can essentially just give you the software and say you host it. So a lot of different options from a flexibility standpoint that differentiates us from some other BDR competitors. And lastly, it's the recovery piece. So we have lightning fast RTOs. We can get your data back in an hour or less from our cloud. And so it's really a matter of, not the backup piece, but the recovery piece. If you can't back up, you shouldn't be in the business in the first place. Yeah. It's about getting your data back when you need your data back. We've got various options of doing that, whether that's just, right away, just spinning up from the cloud, shipping you a disk, etc. But as a differentiator, it's definitely the recovery piece.
So I completely agree with you, Eric. And one other differentiation point I will point out is, with Axcient, we back up from the perspective of the application layer, the file and folder layer, and the Office 365 layer. Most of our competitors will do one, maybe two of those,
Sure.
Will not do all three. And when you go in, you're going to be managing two, if not three different login portals and systems and user interfaces. Our goal is to simplify that so that you have a single sign-on to a single portal that manages your application layer, your file and folder layer, and your Office 365 layer. And that's going to be a significant differentiation as well. But then once you need to recover, it goes to what Eric talked about, is everybody should be able to back up. It's that recovery. And how do you distinguish yourself in that recovery process?
Yeah, and I think you had a slide on X360 and what that experience is. We could probably have an entire webinar just dedicated to that, and what that means and how easy the user experience is. But I think from a more of a kind of macro business perspective, it's, as an owner, you're always thinking, how can I automate? How can I standardize? How can I document best practices and implement that? And I think from a standardization standpoint, from a training standpoint, if your techs are all, experienced in X360 and deploying an agent to back up Office 365, to back up a file server, to back up, whatever you need via, our portal and our experience, it's just easier from a standardization and a training standpoint for everybody else. So you open the door on, I forget to ask the question, but as a sales guy, you open the door when you're trying to ask me a question about bragging about our product. So
Another guy named Eric.
oh, perfect.
We have one more question, kind of piggybacking from Tracy. How well does Axcient play with other cloud providers, for example, Green Cloud?
We know specifically to Green Cloud, but I don't know, Michael, if you have any take on that.
So, from the question of can we use Green Cloud as a target? So, yes, you can use Green Cloud and others kind of as a target, depending on how you set that up. And that's really a question we'd have to bring in engineers to truly understand it, because all of the backup information is proprietary, but you can set up your own data center. So if you can set up your own data center, you can set up your own data center in like a Green Cloud or wherever it might be and back up to. But there's a whole reference architecture that we would have to provide for you of how you do that and how you go about doing that.
Yeah, so you definitely can. And the terminology that we use is like a private cloud environment. So you are hosting the data. So you can send it wherever you want to, but at that point, the liability would be shifted to you to making sure that your data center provider is meeting the compliancy standards, the security standards, and we go back to recovery, right? Once you take the data, recovering the data also gets shifted to you. So just making sure you know of those steps when you're using another data center. Just be mindful of that.
But we do have, about 1/3 of our partners do manage their own data center from a Replicate perspective, and so they have the ability to spin up servers attached to that data backup. So that capability is there, but like Eric, you take on that liability. But if you can do that and make great margins off that, absolutely. And that's the flexibility of our solutions.
Absolutely.
All right. With that, I think we're going to conclude this webinar. Thank you very much. Appreciate everyone's attention and great questions coming in. Eric, thank you for joining us today. Always appreciated to get the sales mind in here when you're not exactly selling, so I love it.
Awesome. Yeah, anytime. Feel free to loop me in. And any questions after this, I'm more than happy to jump on calls or answer any questions via email as well.
Sounds great. Thanks, everyone.